Namaste and welcome to the third episode of Kurakani with XAMUN. Today, as our guest speaker, we have Mr. Syed Ahmed here with us to discuss Nepal foreign policies. A little about our guest speaker. He is a KSL student currently pursuing his undergraduate degree in Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Legislative Law, with aspirations of becoming Nepal's Prime Minister. Syed is not your average college student. He is someone who people look up to as a role model. He has the intellectual capacity on par with New York's legislators. Dave has spent the last 8 years immersed in the vast world of MUNs, making a name for himself, not only in the Nepali MUN circuit, but also in the Indian and Bangladeshi circuit. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today, sir.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to be here amongst you guys.
So, for today's topic of discussion, we have Nepal's foreign policies. So, sir, would you like to give an introduction of our topic so we can start with the discussion?
Yeah, sure. So Nepal's foreign policy, when we talk about it, it's basically Nepal's national interest and its comparison to the global interests. So we have this entire idea that a country's foreign policy is basically there is an unanimous global policy or unanimous global idea, right? And each country competes with their national interest or their national policy. They're fighting towards this tussle between the international idea and the national idea. So when we talk about Nepal's foreign policy, it's basically what is Nepal's idea, its national interest, its ideology, and its substance or context in question of global issues ranging from terrorism, wars around the world, or human rights situations, or humanitarian situations, and things like that. So yeah.
As we are well aware, in the last few years, there have been quite a few changes in the past foreign policies with the new implementation of MCC and it's being approved. So, what are your ideas and opinions on the approval of MCC?
So in question of MCC, I think when we are talking about MCC, it's very important that we remember a very important doctrine that Nepal follows. It's an integral instrument of our foreign policy, which is the theory of non-alignment. Nepal does not align itself with any particular idea, compact, treaties, or countries in question of any strategic outlook or something like a military or security alliance or anything like that. So there was a lot of confusion and chaos regarding MCC as well. That whether is it a part of the the Indo-Pacific strategy or is it not? Whether whether Nepal will become part of a military alliance with the United States if we ratify it, right? And yet again, there was also this coercive diplomacy which was going on at the very last when US released a statement saying that it would have to revisit its policies or its friendship with Nepal if Nepal does not ratify the MCC. So all in all, I think there are both positives and negatives. There are pros and cons to the entire idea of MCC, right? But then I think the question here or the primary concern which I have is, what sort of a world do we live in where a stronger country can threaten the other by saying that we'll have to revisit our friendship or our relation if a country does not accept a grant, right? Or if a country does not accept an aid. In question of that, there are a lot of technical details which people really missed out on, and which even government to some extent lacked researching on, because we did not do any substantive research on MCC before we signed it, right? Yes, it was ratified by the Ministry of Law, Justice, and Parliamentary Affairs. Yes, it was ratified by the Finance Ministry as well as the Foreign Ministry. But then there was no constructive research which was done in terms of its application, right? And to an extent where even our professors, one of them while working for the government, had suggested the government that we should actually research on it, but then there was very limited interest shown by the government in question of the same. So now that it has been ratified, I think we really have to see that how it comes about. But then if we were to stick to the entire good of the pact, I think if we are able to bring out the optimum, I think we should be good enough to move forward.
Okay, so now that MCC has been ratified in our country and it is going to be implemented soon, what do you think are the benefits that this will bring to our country?
So in terms of benefits, I think definitely there is. There are a lot. I think primarily when we talk about MCC, it's not majorly just about the investment, is what I feel, right? Because a few $100 million is not really something that which Nepal cannot afford. Despite being a considerably developing economy, we could still put up that amount of money. But then it's really about the technology which would come in. It's really about that intellectual, integrated technical knowledge which the United States would bring in. I think that's going to be very essential. I think us partnering with the United States of America in four projects, right? That's going to be very important. And on top of that, I think the the United States of America in the entire policy also define how the features of the compact is also somewhere bringing out elements such as sustainability and climate smart innovations and expanding opportunity for all, and things like country led or country owned innovations and unlocking private investments. So in terms of that, I think it really opens up this partnership, or it really opens up certain venues for the country in terms of us being able to enjoy the technology that they would bring. I think the expertise and the technical knowledge that they would bring. On top of that, it's also a great opportunity for the private sector to partner with the government sector or public sector in terms of implementation of the project. And on top of that, I think since this is an co-led project, I think there is comparatively pretty less chances of third party involvement or things such as corruption, because yet again it works on sort of a check and balance mechanism. So what would really happen is that any one of the parties could trigger an you know accounting investigation, or any one of the parties could investigate the accounts. They could hand it over to a chartered accounting firm, right? And what it really brings is that since both parties will be checking each other, I think that really provides us for this space where you know us as well as them, they are in obligation that we have to do this right, we have to do this correctly. So I think that's the primary good which comes out of it.
You mentioned the check and balance of power here. However, US being very it's like a power block country, right? It's like really powerful in today's world. So how do you think this power dynamic is going to influence the whole MCC as a whole?
Right. So yeah, that's a very important question. First of all, right, we do have to acknowledge the fact that US is a very very strategically strong country in terms of all outlooks. As a matter of fact, so how would it really play out when we as a considerably or comparatively smaller economy or a smaller country, when we are in this project together, how does it play out? How much of a role does the US have? And would we really be able to carry this out smoothly? I think that for the most part, I think yes, yes, we would be able to, because if you were to read the entire compact, you would see that it's been quite. For the most part, I would say not entirely, but then for the most part, it's based on a very equity basis. So both the countries sort of share equal amount of power. Nepal can withdraw from the MCC whenever it wants, giving the United States of America prior notice of 1 year, or similar for the counterparts as well. So could the United States of America, if they feel that the projects are not being implemented properly, or if they find any form of corruption or something like that happening. So when we really talk about, how would this dynamic play out, I think it would really go back to the legislative text of, how the treaty, how, sorry, not treaty actually, how the compact has been drafted and what are the code of conduct which have been laid down on the ground. And I think if we read that out, I think, it's pretty equitable on that basis. So as long as both the countries do not have an outright conflict with each other in the days to come, I think this would go down pretty smoothly.
Okay, but before the MCC was signed, there was this discussion of there was like this statement released by the US about how they have to rethink this relationship with Nepal and their friendly relationships, right? So when the starting of the compact was based on something as such, how do you think this will in turn play out? Because that was quite a strong statement released by the US. Don't you think so?
Right. So definitely, it's a as I mentioned previously, it's a form of coercive diplomacy, or it's a form of bully diplomacy, if I may put it simply, it's a form of bully diplomacy. But then, I think from the perspective or from the shoes of the United States of America or their lens, if we were to see it, Nepal was the one who applied for the grant in the first place, and we had this entire set of parameters which we had to stand on, and we did, and finally it was approved. Right, so both the countries have considerably gone through a lot of processes which had to be done, the due diligence which had to be done, and which was done. So I think in terms of the question of how US releasing a statement on they would have to revisit their policy with Nepal or their friendship with Nepal, it I think stems from the fact that they sort of got agitated or irritated that there was such an animosity in terms of the politics of our country and its unstable nature towards the entire MCC pact, right? So I think it came out of that. However, yes, I am very strongly I strongly disapprove of any such thing, right? Because you know it does not stand right just because a country is saying that no, I don't want your money, or if a country tomorrow decides to say that no, I don't want your money, right? If countries start revisiting their foreign policies with that particular country, I think it's going to be a very chaotic world, and that was something which was unexpected. I would say not even unexpected. That was something which was surprising because the U.S. is very strategic in its handling of particular country or its foreign relations with other countries. But then it was definitely something which came off as a very strong statement from their side that and you should move forward with it, or else it's gonna hamper you in the future.
So there was quite some controversy when MCC was first discussed, and there was this whole discussion about how MCC is vague and there should be certain amendments into it. So, what is your belief on MCC being vague and there should be amendments on it?
Right. I think in question of that, yes, there were a lot of controversies, and um, first things first. So yes, I do think that there should be something called a sunset law, which should have been put in place so that it could guard the entire compact. And a sunset law is basically something sort of a temporary law which is created just for guarding or legislating something in particular. For example, we could have legislated the MCC compact between the US and Nepal through the means of a sunset law. I think till this day, till today, I think that it's very eminent that such a sunset law be put into place so that it could guard it. In terms of other controversies, I think there were a lot. We also heard things such as the MCC compact is supersedes the constitution of Nepal, right, and things like that. And that's true in a sense. But then, if you read the entire compact, you would see that the compact is holds the status of an international agreement, and any international agreement which is signed between countries, or any country which has ratified any international agreement, that particular international agreement or that particular instrument supersedes the national law of the country. So, for example, the UDHR, which Nepal has signed, the Child Rights Convention, Labor Rights Convention, or any other international agreement that the country has signed, right? Nepal has signed, all of them already supersede the national law, which is the constitution, right? So it isn't something which is not in practice, right? Any international agreement had already superseded the national law, which being the constitution, and this one in particular as well. This did as well. So um, this now you would also say that how could a country let this happen, right? So what basically happens is when a country is signing such a pact, or when a country is entering into a convention or a treaty or anything like that, what really happens is that the entire text of the treaty has to first go to the parliament, and then there's a sub-parliamentary committee which will discuss on it. A bunch of group of experts on law who will sit on it, and then who would cross-check each clause or articles or each legislative writings of the compact or the document with the current law of the country, right? And they compare it. They compare both of it, and if they find that there are no existing laws which are sort of overlapping or crossing each other, right? That's the time when the country would say, yes, there is no problem with this. We could ratify it, right? So when we say that MCC is above the constitution of Nepal, right, we do not mean to say that MCC is going to get away with doing anything in Nepal, or Nepal's law would not apply to it. It's just that there are no current provisions in the constitution, right, which overlap the provisions in the MCC compact, right? So um, that is why a country approves of it or disapproves of it tomorrow. But then any agreement which holds the status of an international agreement would supersede the law. But yes, I think in terms of amendment, I think one strong amendment which is required would be yet again a sunset law, which would guard the entire compact and the entire project relation between Nepal and US in specific. That would be something which I would really want to see.
So, as MCC is a compact, how is this different from the other aid programs that Nepal is involved in?
So, yes. So, in terms of other aid programs that we are involved in, it is really not as complex as this one, right? This compact is a partnership between two countries, right? And there is a co-led exercise which is going to happen, right? US is going to be a part of it. US is going to have to do intellectual property or intellectual technological advancement which they have. That's going to be shared with the country. They're going to train people, they're going to bring in their technology, and they're going to do things, right? So that is what makes it more complex as compared to other aids. When we take other aids, it's simply that we receive a particular amount of aid from other countries, and there is no involvement of the other country. At max, the only involvement that they have is that an annual report is to be submitted to the host country which has provided the aid, or any organization or agency for that matter, right? So that is how any general aid would work, right? However, in question of this particular one, it's not just a compact, it's not just an aid, it's also a project partnership between the United States of America and the government of Nepal, right? So that is what makes it particularly difficult, because there are going to be two different entities, two different governments who are going to come and work together, right? So that's where the entire problem of why this particular grant or this particular aid is so much more complex as compared to the other ones, because in other ones we just receive the aid, there is no high level partnership as this one, right? But then in this particular one, it's also a project partnership between two countries. So that is something which makes this one comparatively a more complex one as compared to the others.
Okay, so now moving away from MCC and discussing something else, what are your opinions and ideas on the Belt and Road Initiatives in Nepal, the BRI?
Sorry, BRI?
Yes.
Okay, Belt and Road Initiative.
Yes.
Yet again, I think when we talk about BRI, I think it's going to be something as similar because the BRI itself is a very intensive project. The Belt and Road Initiative, which hosted by the Chinese government, it's a large project in itself. Which talks on connection and trade routes and things like that. And Nepal is already part of BRI. But then, yet again, if you were to look into it, there is no document which both the countries have signed, right? There is no document of Nepal and China in terms of the memorandum of understanding, which is between these two countries, and that is something which makes it so much more, you know, doubtable, questionable, because in case of MCC, we had it right there, right? It was right there. It was up front, and we could read it. Everybody could access it. But then we do not have any such document or papers in question of BRI. What if tomorrow BRI turns out to be a strategic alliance or a security alliance, right? What then? What then about the doctrine of non-alignment, right? Because we have already ratified it, and I think this is the time for us to actually realize that okay, we have signed it, but then there is a research which is required. I think this is the time we realize it. I think we should learn our lesson from the MCC compact that um, this has happened previously. We applied for it, we signed the document, and when it came for the time to ratify it, there was such a huge fuss. There was this entire set of confusions which was going on, and it led to a lot of controversies. And rightfully so, because yes, as you pointed out, there are a lot of things which are pretty vague in MCC, and I think if we are to correctly move forward, I think it's our our realization should be that we should start our research right now. I think we should start investing in the research right now with the question of BRI, that you know whether or not tomorrow this is going to happen or that is going to happen or not. I think this is the right time, because if tomorrow that turns out to be a strategic alliance, or that turns out to be a security alliance for that matter, what then? How would our foreign policy, or how would the people in power, our authorities, respond to it? Is the question. So I think we should learn our lesson from MCC, and I think we should apply it to the current understanding between the Nepalese and the Chinese government and their signing of the PRI.
Okay, so while we're talking about BRI, what are the main aims and objectives of this initiative?
Okay, so main aims and objective of BRI. I think BRI in itself stands as this infrastructure development project primarily. So if you were to read out, or if you were to go to, go to websites which promote BRI, or if you were to go to the Chinese government's website, and their entire initiative of BRI, I think BRI is this entire huge project which primarily aims for you know things like regional integration, increasing trade, stimulating economic growth. These are the prime three objectives of BRI. It's a massive infrastructure development project. It looks to initiate a lot of things, but then primarily I think if we read it yet again, we would see that there is things like infrastructure connectivity, there is financial integration, connecting people, and then policy coordinations and things like that, right? So PRI basically works on three essential elements. First of all, right, being regional integration, increasing trade, and stimulating economic growth, being the primary objective, right? Under which, yet again, they define major priorities, being that there should be policy coordination and infrastructure connectivity and financial integration and connecting people on and things like trade, right? So that is something which BRI looks to do. Now, that is what they suggest in their websites or on any document that there is on BRI. There is one from the World Bank. There is one from European Union, right? There's one from the Chinese government as well. So these are the major points of coordination or major points of understanding between countries for the entire initiative of BRI or its mechanism.
So while we're discussing BRI and NCC, so there is quite this strategic rivalry between US and China. So how do you think this rivalry between these two countries and Nepal being a part of two different sorts of agreements with these two countries is going to affect Nepal?
So okay, I think primarily as long as uh, they do not overlap each other, there is not going to be any problem. But then when you talk about BRI, I think it's very important for us to also mention something called the Indo-Pacific Strategy. The IPS was something which was brought on by the US and it's allies to counter the entire BRI's initiative. So yet again, we're not a part of IPS, which is the Indo-Pacific Strategy, but then the US did push really hard for us to be a part of the Indo-Pacific strategy. However, we are not part of the Indo-Pacific strategy, so we can see that there is a tussle going on between these two major powers, the United States and China, in terms of the economic outlook of the world. That they're trying to counter each other, or they're trying to portray their dominance, or they're trying to hold this grasp on world domination of economics, right, and economy, right. And I think MCC, yet again, somehow there's also this larger question: what happens if the two collide with each other? Is it going to be a problem? Now, yet again, as I said, there is no official memorandum of understanding, which would provide us with provisions of BRI, which is signed between the Chinese government and the Nepalese government. But then, if there are no provisions, or if there are no articles, if there are no texts in these compact or this entire documentation which overlap each other, I think that should not be a problem. Now, I would assume that there are none, because when this entire question of MCC was going on in Nepal, the Chinese ambassador had also said that we welcome all forms of economic cooperation for Nepal. So yet again, I would make a calculated assumption that the Chinese ambassador had read the MCC, or the Chinese government knows about the MCC compact between Nepal and United States of America, right? And when they promoted it, or when they said that we welcome all forms of economic cooperation in Nepal, I think that sort of points out that there are no overlapping factor. However, that would just be my personal assumption or my personal opinion, because yet again, we do not have any substantive in terms of the BRI's memorandum of understanding between the Nepal's government and the Chinese government.
Okay. So as I was saying, a very important topic in today's world is the Russian-Ukraine war. Nepal having this neutral country when it comes to is the foreign policy take of Nepal on this issue?
Right. So I think in terms of the Russo-Ukrainian war, I think Nepal made it pretty clear that disapproved. We disapprove of any forms of atrocities around the world. If you look at the very first press release or statement which was released by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we suggested all sides to exercise maximum restraint, and we absolutely disapprove of any act of aggression from one country towards another. Yet again, in terms of the resolution which was passed in the United Nations, whether to deem this as an act of aggression, right? Nepal voted yes for that particular resolution, and rightfully so, because in situations like these, what happens is that despite being a neutral country, or despite being having theory of non-alignment or not taking sides, it's very important that you voice out your opinion in terms of when something wrong is happening, right? What if tomorrow another country, because we are sandwiched between two giant nations, what if tomorrow one of these two giant nations start attacking Nepal, right? And had we said no to that resolution back yesterday, right? What would happen is that countries would start questioning our motive, saying that you did not speak out when the entire Russo-Ukrainian war was going on. We do not understand what you're trying to say here. When you are being attacked, it's like a double standard that you're showing. But then the foreign policy is pretty clear in terms of in terms of its entire outlook of condemning forms of hostilities, violence, or suppression of one country by another, right? So yet again, I think Nepal rightly had, I think I'd not say in my personal opinion, but then I think the people in the think tank or the people in the foreign ministry, rightfully after total consideration of our foreign policy, had voted, yes for that resolution to identify the Russian action as an act of aggression.
So the Russia-Ukraine war has impacted Nepal in more ways than one, right? So how do you think this Russian-Ukraine war that's going on is going to impact Nepal in the long run?
I think it's going to be pretty significant. I think we're already starting to see its effects, with petrol prices going as high as 180 at a point of time, and right now it's at 178. I think, right. Not just that, the entire food chain supply is also going to be disrupted because the food chain supply, 19% of what's food supply comes from that particular region, and when these two massive countries are at war, it definitely disrupts this entire flow of food chain. Not just that, something as basic as maybe, let's say, sunflower oil. I think which a quarter of the world's sunflower oil is produced in Russia, right? And if you were to go out and look for the sunflower oil's prices, you would see that it's rising. And I think that is something which points out that this is going to impact you severely, and not just in terms of that. I think in terms of our economy, our foreign reserves, and things like that. It's going to impact us severely because in times of war, people or countries especially are going to starting to hold on to their foreign reserves. They will not be willing to come up, go to visit other countries. People's entire budget agendas would change, right? And countries focus especially, right, it would move away. So for example, the Germans have decided that they will start spending 100 billion euros as their defense budget. Now, where will this money come from? They'll take money from one particular sector and they'll pour money on the other sector. So we do not know which particular sector that they are going to take money from to make up that 100 billion euros, right? It's going to be same for other countries as well. So in terms of that, they're going to, a lot of countries at this grand stage, what is going to happen is that a lot of countries are going to lessen their imports. They're going to be less willing to travel to certain regions. They're going to be less willing to do things, right? And they're going to hold on to foreign reserves. And yet again, I talked about the petrol prices, right? The price of sunflower oil and things like that, right? With 19% of the entire food supply being provided by that particular region, and the disruption of that. So it's a pretty large impact, I think. While you and me are going to feel it less, people, those who are not particularly as privileged as us, they're going to feel it very severely, and as well as the government, right? Even recently, Nepal has banned the imports of luxury good, right? Why so? Not just reason not just being that we're low on our foreign reserves. It's also that we have to hold on to our foreign reserves, because tomorrow anything can happen. And in situations like these, you would want to have your foreign reserves at its optimum level. So yeah.
So in such a situation of economic, let's say, crisis, right, what should Nepal's government do to deal with this situation and make sure its impacts lower with time rather than making a dent in the national economy?
I think there is very less in terms of what we could do, or even for that matter, our government could do, um, because I think it's a tussle between two massive countries. I think at this point we sort of realize how much more important the role of the United Nations is, or the role of organizations as such is, because it's about creating pressure at this point, right? It's about um, creating a situation where countries realize that it's not in their best interest to go to war. It's not in their best interest to continue this war in for Russia, right? So at an individual level, I think there is very less we can do apart from us trying to be fully aware of what is going around in the world, of us being fully aware of what are the things that we could do, right? Like cutting down on our cost, not eating things like lace, because lace is also classified under a luxury good, and yet again we'll have to import it, right? So individuals should take such steps where they realize that okay, there are certain particular set of things that we should not do, right? And also at a government level, I think it's about creating that pressure, and if we are able to create that pressure, we will be, hopefully we're able to mitigate this crisis.
Um, topic of that. Nepal and Russia have a bilateral relationship, which is based on trust and understanding, mutual understanding. So, how is Nepal's opposition to Russia's stand in this war going to affect Nepal?
I think in terms of that, we we are particularly disapproving of their actions, and not the entire relation, I would say, because yet again, Nepal genuinely showed its concern in the voting of the resolution, which suggested for the suspension of the Russian delegation from the Human Rights Council, right? Nepal abstained in that particular voting, and I think that was a part of our foreign policy showing our disapproval that we believe that it's a procedural error because there was no investigation that was conducted, right? And on um, you know then why is Russia being removed or suspended from the Human Rights Council? And not just that, I think you know yes, the relationship is going to be affected to a certain point, but then I think in question of how well we are able to maintain it. For example, us doing things such as being abstained to the entire idea of Russia's suspension from the Human Rights Council and things like that are also going to work in positive when tomorrow the war ends.
So, we have discussed Nepal's foreign policies with major five bloc countries in the world. Um, what are your beliefs and ideas on the foreign policies that Nepal has with India?
So I think when we talk about foreign policy, I think something which I very openly and majorly disapprove of is, I think, our foreign policy. I think I personally, in my personal opinion, think that it's not stable. I think when a particular political party comes into power, our political leading or our diplomatic leaning it's towards one country, and when another political party comes into power, our diplomatic leaning is towards the other country. Now, this is fine to a point where, like, all the fluid factors in terms of our diplomatic relations is changing, or it changes its discourse. But then, in case of Nepal, we see that what happens is that even factors which should be permanent or which should not, you know, change so easily or in such short amount of time, it entirely changes from one country to another. It's like you're in a football match, and the referee says your goal post is on the left, but then at the middle the referee just goes on to say no, sorry, wait, your goal post is on the right. And then yet again the goal post is keep shifting from the right to the left to the left to the right, right? So that is something which we see in terms of our foreign policy. So I think primarily if Nepal could build this relation, or if we are able to, you know, able to maintain this particular idea of, you know, us being able to identify that, okay, these are the elements that should not change regardless of which political party is in power, right? These are the things which would remain constant regardless of, you know, which party comes into power, and these are the factors which are going to change when political parties come into power, and, you know, according to their particular liking or their particular policy, they move forward with the foreign relations, right?
Yes, I very much agree with your opinion on this. So, wrapping things up with the foreign policies, I would like to move on to discussing MUNs. You have been known to be, in the MUN circuit for quite some time now, and you have actually also been a part of XAMUN in the past. So, what was your opinion of XAMUN that you were a part of?
So I've been a part of two XAMUs, and it's been absolutely amazing. And I think XA is the conferences that XA holds, the Model UN conferences. I think it's one of the best in the entire city and the region as well. Being part of both the Model UN conferences, I think the current conferences served me absolutely amazingly. I had a wonderful experience. The first time it was as a delegate in the dissect committee, and the chairs were pretty experienced. They were really helpful, and they helped me a lot. And at that point, I was a very intermediate level delegate, but then I did pretty good in the committee. So yeah, I was pretty happy, and the socials and, you know, the management of the team and everything. It was really well. And one particular thing which I absolutely loved, and I think till this day, which I've never seen. You know, I've been a part of international conferences. I've been to countries. I've flown to countries to be a part of Model UN conferences, but I've never seen any conference do is that when I was a part of the XAMUN, one of the OC members, when I was a delegate, right? One of the OC members, they came in and they said, "Is anyone a Muslim here?" And I raised my placard, and they handed me this certificate that the food was halal, right? And it was a very small gesture, right? For others, right? It is insignificant for others, but me as a Muslim, I think it meant the world to me, because if XA is taking care of the fact that me being a Muslim, I would not eat non-halal food, right? And they assure me that the food is halal, I think that speaks volume to how wonderful this conference is. And I think that particular gesture, it really, really, you know, enlightened me. It really was a wonderful experience. That was a beautiful, beautiful gesture, and, you know, I'm not going to forget that ever, because, you know, in none of the Indians, right? In none of the Indians in India, or be it in Bangladesh, or be it in Bali, or be it in Germany, or in United States, I have never had such an experience, right? Because, and the fact that they were individually catering and giving halal certificates in an envelope, yeah, right? I think that really took it away. And right, secondly, I was there alongside with Sarthak, you know. In the Security Council, I served as the vice president, and I think that too as well. I think it was a wonderful, wonderful experience, having been able to share the executive board's panel with Sarthak, who's somebody who's such an experienced individual, right, with such amazing opinion, thoughts, and values, right, and he's just so natural with the delegates in terms of, you know, making them think on their feet, you know, being able to run the committee with him was a wonderful experience. And the delegates as well, I think they are just so much more willing to learn and to grow. I think that's very important, right? Even if they are not experienced, or even if they are a beginner, I think primarily something which is a driving force is that, you know, delegates wanting to learn something. And I think XA is always able to provide that, and that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. So, you know, my experience with XA has been absolutely wonderful, and I regard XA as one of the best unions that I've ever been a part of.
Thank you so much. Is there any sort of feedback or constructive criticism that you would like to give us so that we can make this year's event even better?
I think I really cannot think of anything because you know both the conferences that I've been a part of, I think the management, the organizing committee has done such a wonderful job, and from my side, I've not had any any complaints whatsoever. Um, to a point that you know last time when I was serving as the executive board alongside with Sarthak, I got sick, and so I got sick, and we were in this place which was a little bit far off from the city, right? But then the organizing committee um, came to me, they talked to me, they asked me what happened, how are you fine? And they went all the way to the pharmaceutical, they brought me medicines. So I think when you have such a wonderful organizing committee who take care of you so much, who are so much more involved with what's happening, what do you need, are you all right, and things like that, I think it really makes the experience wonderful. And I just like to wish you guys the best of luck, and I really hope that you guys blow the standards this time even higher as compared to the last time. That's a tough job for you guys because the standards that the previous XA Model UN conferences have set is already right on the top, and I think it's going to be hard. But then if there is any particular set of organizing committee which will be able to do it, I think it's going to be you guys. So best of luck for that.
Thank you so much. So, as someone myself who has been a part of committees led by you as chair, I was wondering if you would be willing to be a part of this year's annual and if we can expect you to be there.
I think definitely you could certainly expect me to be a part of the XA Montreal conference because you know I'll be very honest and be very blunt here. I've left out on other Model UN conferences just to be a part of XA because yet again our college has this requirement of certain attendance that you have to reach, or you'll have to have this percentage of attendance. So I had actually calculated that okay, I'll have to miss out this MUN so that I can be a part of XA. So I'm really excited to be a part of XA, and I think that tells you how much excited I am. So yeah, I've left out on a few conferences, maybe three or four, just so that I can be a part of XA. So yeah, let's see. Hopefully, I'll be there.
So, we'll be looking forward to having you at our event this year. This kind of wraps up our talk for today. I would like to thank you for being a part of this and expressing your knowledge and sharing so many new things with me. I think it was an amazing experience to be here and be able to have this talk with you as someone who really looks up to you. I have been like in your committees and I have been a part of MUNs with you, and it's an absolute honor to be able to have this conversation with you and to lead this show and host the show with you. So thank you so much for being a part of this and for sharing your knowledge and experiences here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me, and it was a wonderful conversation which I had with you. And I really look forward to seeing you guys again and meeting in XA hopefully, and as well as other conferences. And best of luck to the organizing committee, and kudos for you guys to organize this entire discourse of Kurakani, because I think it's a wonderful initiative as well, which really yet again goes on to talk about how wonderful this particular conference is going to be. So yeah, best of luck to you guys, and thank you so much for having me.